Welcome back to Brainscratch. I'm John Lordan. Thank you so much for spending some time with me here today on this special updates episode. Sun Tzu, philosopher, general, and author of The Art of War, once said that the wheels of justice grind slow, but grind fine. Shark Tank's Barbara Corcoran is quoted as saying the wheels of justice, they're square wheels. Are possibly both of those statements accurate? After today's case updates, I think you'll agree that they are. In truth, each case is an individual instance with unique circumstances and challenges. In one of today's cases, the call for bringing in a special prosecutor seems like a positive step towards justice. But for some reason, in another case, it's being treated as an insult and against the wishes of a grieving family. We'll be diving into the latest with both of these cases, the murder of Amber Spradlin and the disappearance of Crystal Rogers. But those wheels of justice have been grinding a lot this year. We've got a few other updates to cover related to the murders of Jared Bridegan and Ernie Ortiz. Let's start with Crystal Rogers. We originally touched on her case back in July of 2017 on the Brainscratch episode about the ambush of a Bardstown police officer, Jason Ellis. Now, Crystal's mother was very vocal early on that she thought those two cases were connected. Ellis was killed on Bluegrass Parkway. Crystal's car would be found running on Bluegrass Parkway. Law enforcement did name a suspect in Crystal's case, her boyfriend, Brooks Houck. Then, a seemingly crooked cop came up on the public's radar. He was fired from the police force for leaking confidential information to Brooks. And that police officer was Brooks's own brother, Nick. Despite that, I still wasn't sure that the connection between the two cases was very solid, but it seems like a recent development might be firming that conclusion up. Let's get into reviewing the articles together, and we'll start by going back through Crystal's case to bring you completely up to speed on it, and then we'll hit the latest developments. Let's start at heavy.com with some information about Crystal. Crystal Marie Rogers was a Bardstown native who worked with rental properties, and she was also the mother of 5 children. Rogers is described by her friend Beth Downs as fun, caring, happy, humble, and beautiful. Anytime I needed her, she would drop everything. It did not matter. There was a time we were joined at the hip. Where one of us was, you'd always find the other. As we got older and had families of our own, we didn't get to spend much time together, but always picked up right back where we left off. She was a great mom. Her kids were always her priority no matter what, and she always treated my girls like they were her own as well. She would always be willing to help someone. She would give her shirt off her back if needed and never ask for anything in return. One of Rogers' daughter also wrote about Rogers, saying she was a very special woman, and she also said, since my mom's been missing, life has really been hard. I always wonder what my life would be like if she and my pawpaw was still here. And what she's talking about is Crystal's father, who was a big advocate in terms of the efforts to find Crystal, would wind up being shot on his own property when he was going out hunting. And there's a lot of suspicion around that. And quite honestly, that with Crystal's case and the case of Jason Ellis could all be related. Let's learn a little bit more about that occurrence. Tommy Ballard, Sherry's husband, was shot and killed in 2016. The 54-year-old was hunting on the family property when he was shot. Now, I'm seeing it described 2 different ways. Either he was out there hunting, I believe he had his grandson with him, or he was getting ready to go hunting. But he was on his property when he was shot. I believe it's a single shot direct to the chest. Sherry says, I think they wanted my husband, who was a driving force in trying to find my daughter, out of the way. Whoever did that knows I could not find my daughter the way he tried to. Tommy Ballard's death was reported as being classified by authorities as a death investigation and not a homicide because they could not rule out whether it was accidental. And honestly, there's not a ton of information in terms of that case. The info that's out there is very, very basic. It's basically him and his grandson getting ready or going out hunting on their own property. He gets shot somehow. Makes you wonder, is someone watching from afar? Are we talking about some type of like Was it a sniper situation? And that's why I wanted to include this last comment about it being a death investigation, because we have heard of accidents when hunting before. There certainly could be an accidental component to this. Do we think that that's what's happening here? There's a lot floating around these cases, but there's so little detail around Tommy's death, it's kind of hard to know for sure. Moving on to Kentucky.com, I want to go over a kind of a brief view of the timeline of events to give you all just a better scope of understanding when it comes to Crystal's case. Very early on, they presume that she is dead as well. So in this first paragraph, they're saying that her death and her father Tommy's deaths are part of a string of killings that have been unsolved since 2013, when a police officer was ambushed while removing tree limbs from a Bluegrass Parkway exit. Of course, we know they're talking about Officer Ellis there. Starting off this timeline, July 5th, 2015, Rogers, a mother of 5, is first reported missing by her mother, Sherry. Brooks Houck, Rogers' boyfriend, is believed to be the last person to have seen her on July 3rd, 2015. The day she was reported missing, Rogers' Chevrolet Malibu turns up abandoned along the desolate Bluegrass Parkway with a flat tire. Her keys, phone, and purse are discovered inside, according to the FBI. We go to August 11th, 2016. Nick Houck, a fired Bardstown police officer and the brother of Brooks, is served a search warrant in connection to Crystal Rogers. The local sheriff's office served the search warrant at the home of Houck's grandmother, Anna Whitesides. Nick Houck, along with his mother, who was at home at the time, reportedly offered no resistance when the warrant was served. So really, they hit, if I recall correctly, I think it's 3 different locations of the Houck family. November 19th, 2016, Tommy Ballard, 54 years old, Rogers' father, is shot by an unknown assailant while preparing for a hunting trip with his 12-year-old grandson on family property next to Bluegrass Parkway. Ballard's hit in the chest and he dies instantly. Before his death and Rogers' disappearance, Bardstown officer Jason Ellis was ambushed and killed in 2013. And we also have 2 other deaths. Kathy Netherland and her daughter Samantha were murdered in 2014. It's interesting because the developments we're going to see with this case are really focused on 3 of these murders, and they kind of leave Kathy and Samantha's out of it. I'm not exactly sure why. I don't know enough about those cases in particular, but I've already made a note that I'm going to do a future episode of Brainscratch just about those cases to try to help them as well. Those families are a bit upset that now there's been all this focus put on 3 of these 5 unsolved homicides, and it kind of makes sense to me as well. One of them literally said it feels like a slap in the face. I imagine it would be if you thought you were part of this group of people who didn't want to be in this group, but all of you were family members affected by these unsolved homicides in the area. And for some reason, 3 of them get special attention, but your 2 don't. So I definitely get that. August 18th, 2019, a partially built home owned by Brooks Houck is destroyed in a fire. So Brooks is basically in real estate. He owns properties, he owns parcels of land, which makes this case, if he is he's been called out as a suspect in this case. If he's responsible for actually doing it, it makes locating Crystal extremely difficult because he has access to all kinds of different parcels of land that are privately owned. I don't think he's just going to say, yeah, you guys can have access to my land. Go ahead and search all of it. So for law enforcement, that becomes tricky because they need to justify searches for each of these individual places, which they do go about, but it seems like they haven't hit the right location yet, assuming that Brooks is responsible for this if he actually is. It's just one of the things here, but now we're hearing about, hey, there's a partially built home, and on August 18th, 2019, it's destroyed in a fire. Could that have had some evidence in it of some kind? Maybe, maybe not. Although he owned several rental properties and at the time was building the Wheeling Avenue home, Brooks Houck is not a suspect in the arson. The fire department, they do think that this could be a case of arson. They're at least investigating it that way. But only the framing of the home was complete when the fire occurred. So just thinking of the logistics of what would you need to burn in that way where you're going to knock down a whole home that is going to impact him financially, I don't know. I don't know. And would burning down the frame of a home really help you cover up whatever else you were trying to burn there? If it was evidence of some kind, would that be enough? I've got some questions about the logistics of that. August 2020, the FBI officially takes the reins. The agency executes search warrants at various properties owned by her boyfriend and his family members. So obviously a lot of focus going towards the Houck family. More than 150 state and federal law enforcement officers execute 9 federal search warrants. Those officers also conducted more than 50 interviews as part of this investigation. The search warrants pertain to 3 properties belonging to the Houck family. Law enforcement was authorized to search Brooks's home, his brother's home, and the family farm. No arrests were made, and the agency would not comment on what was retrieved. However, media reports from the scene report agents seized firearms from each of the homes, along with boxes and filing cabinets. So it seems like evidence was collected, just nothing was announced to the media about what it actually was. In August 2020, the FBI released new surveillance photos asking for the public's help in identifying the drivers of vehicles in these photographs. I don't really know where this lead goes, but we've got a white and red SUV that are showing here. They're on my old Kentucky home campground. So they're trying to track these down. It's mentioning a second photo here that's taken on July 4th, 2015 with an unidentified vehicle, but I don't have a picture of that, unfortunately. Later that same month, the FBI conducted new searches in the Woodlawn Springs neighborhood. About 15 out of 290 homes in that neighborhood were built by Houck Rentals, a company owned by Brooks. On the 4th day of the search, FBI agents discovered an item of interest in the investigation of Rogers' disappearance, although, again, they're not disclosing what that item is. October 17th, 2022, FBI agents conduct a search of a farm in the area, possibly connected to Rogers' disappearance. And as her mother, Sherry, waits for news, federal agents bring cadaver dogs and excavating equipment to the site of that search. The search concludes 5 days later. Once again, we don't hear anything about it. What they do say is, quote, "We hope that the evidence collected will move our investigation one step closer to holding accountable the individual or individuals responsible for Crystal Rogers' disappearance." And that was said by Jody Cohen, the special agent in charge of the FBI Louisville field office. So that's about it for the major kind of high points in terms of this timeline. I just wanted to give you guys some idea about all that. Let's dive a little bit more into Brooks, understand a little bit more about him. Brooks is a businessman, also the former boyfriend and main suspect in the disappearance of Crystal Rogers. He runs Houck Rentals, a business involving real estate holdings. He owns 129 properties and 11 houses. He told police that the last time that they talked, he and Rogers got into an argument over how he treated her children. But he said that she was still at home when he went to bed. He said that Rogers was on her phone when he went to sleep and she was gone when he woke up. Several people around Houck, including 2 relatives and 1 employee, have also been implicated in the case. According to WKLY, one of Houck's employees, Danny Singleton, pleaded guilty to false swearing after he initially faced 38 counts of perjury for lying to detectives. Houck's mother, Anna Whitesides, is also implicated when she invoked her Fifth Amendment right when called to testify in court. And the station reported that whoever's responsible for Crystal's disappearance used Whitesides' car to move Rogers' body. So we've got a big, wide focus going on with the accusations here. And it's kind of curious to me to hear that, like, we've got them, at least when it comes to his employee, Danny Singleton. Why is he lying to detectives to the tune of 38 times? It's really troubling. Now, Houck has some trouble around him as well. Not stuff that's super major. I don't know that it's stuff that's even really related to this. He was acquitted in a theft case back in 2018. He was accused of taking more than 200 bundles of roofing shingles from a Lowe's over a period of multiple days. That was actually taken all the way through a court process, but after less than 2 hours of deliberating, the jury acquitted him. And there was a custody battle that was going on with the Rogers family and Brooks, he actually winds up winning that. Ballard initially had visitation with her grandson, but after several custody hearings, a trial court began to have concerns. Houck said that when his son would return from visiting the Ballards, his son would be sullen and uncooperative, extremely accusatory, and demanding to know, "What did you do to my mommy?" As a result, a 3-judge panel said that there was a detrimental aspect to the boy's visits with his grandmother. It's just the ripples and how these terrible events affect families. I'll never get over it. Over at WHAS11.com, special prosecutor appointed on Nelson County unsolved cases. Here we get to it. A letter obtained by WHAS11 appoints Hardin County's Commonwealth's attorney Shane Young as special counsel on the 3 cases. The letter reads, "This appointment shall be for the purpose of assisting this office in the prosecution, if any, of potential criminal charges related to the deaths of Jason Ellis, Crystal Rogers, and Tommy Ballard, all formerly of Nelson County, Kentucky, or of any other criminal activity discovered as part of the investigations into those matters." So we have a special prosecutor brought in this instance. We know that there was some type of funny business that happened within the police department between Brooks and his brother Nick, and his Nick tipping his brother off. So in a case like this, where you're wondering, has the integrity been compromised in some way? I think bringing a special prosecutor from outside of that situation is probably a really good idea, and that's what we have here. But there's something else very telling about this, and that's that it's not just about the Crystal Rogers case. They are being given the oversight to what's happening with the Jason Ellis case and the Tommy Ballard case, which I don't know if the Tommy Ballard case has ever been formally declared a homicide, but this is a pretty strong statement. And it also makes me wonder about the possibility of these things being all connected. We actually have a quote here about that possibility. This is from Assistant Special Agent in Charge Brian Jones back in an interview from 2020. "It is very rare to have all these cases that are potentially connected in a small community like Nelson County. I think that potentially solving any of these cases could bring resolution to the other ones." So it seems like that special agent does think that there's a very good chance these things are connected. And crack one, you might crack them all. Sherry Ballard says that she was aware of the decision to appoint a special prosecutor and applauds. "I have met with Mr. Young on several occasions, and I do believe he is dedicated and is taking this case very serious," she said. "I feel like Tommy and Crystal's case is in excellent hands. I get so discouraged that things take so long, but I do feel like we're finally headed in the right direction." So just to understand this a little better, what is a special prosecutor? Special prosecutor is a prosecutor who is independent of an office that would normally exercise jurisdiction in a criminal investigation to avoid potential conflicts of interest or to facilitate subject matter area expertise, which is another thing to keep in mind. They might do this in a case where maybe it's a very small police department. They don't deal with homicides regularly. That might be enough justification for them to reach out and say, "Hey, we need a special prosecutor in this case. We don't deal with this kind of thing." So in this instance with Crystal Rogers, seen as a good thing, obviously, from her family, I think, and by the community in general. I think it's hard to look at this case, discuss it in terms of the possibility of there being 1 to 2 to possibly 3 murders and maybe 5. I don't want to discount the other 2. Thinking of that possibility, there's a chain of murders that are somehow connected. It seems like this is a good step. Get some fresh eyes in there, get some different levels of expertise in there, and maybe they can bring this thing to resolution. So in July of 2023, we hit the 8th anniversary of Crystal's disappearance, and during that time, the FBI released a statement. This July 3rd marks the 8th anniversary of the disappearance of Crystal Rogers. Over the last year, FBI Louisville has made significant progress in bringing this case to its rightful conclusion. It's great to hear. Crystal's family and the Bardstown community deserve justice. We continue to pursue every available lead until those responsible for Crystal's disappearance are held accountable. We know that there are still people in the community who have not come forward with details of Crystal's disappearance. It's never too late. If you know something, we urge you to contact the FBI at 502-263-6000, or you can also visit tips.fbi.gov. And then we get to the recent developments, arrest made in connection with missing Kentucky mom. This is the newest information, and here we've got a picture of the person that's been arrested. Joseph L. Lawson, 32 years old, has been charged with conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with physical evidence. Lawson pleaded not guilty in Nelson Circuit Court. His bond was set at $500,000. The indictment charging Lawson does not mention Rogers by name, but says that the crime took place in Nelson County on July 3rd or July 4th. It says that Lawson agreed to aid one or more persons in the planning or commission of the crime or an attempt or solicitation to commit the crime when he and or a co-conspirator intentionally caused the death of another. Lawson was indicted earlier this summer, but the indictments were sealed until his first court appearance. His next appearance is in October. We're going to learn some interesting things about this guy as we go forward. And is there some possibility that he can be connected to Brooks? Who is the man arrested? Well, he's got a bit of a criminal record here. This is not Lawson's first run-in with the law. In fact, he's had multiple criminal charges, with the oldest dating back to 2015. In 2015, domestic violence, that's from May 2015. Receiving stolen property in January of 2018. Possession of a controlled substance, methamphetamine, that happened in June of 2018. He's got another meth charge the following month, July of 2018. In 2020, we've got fourth-degree assault, first-degree strangulation, second-degree facilitation to strangulation, unlawful imprisonment. Those are some terrifying charges. And in 2021, burglary, mischief. As a matter of fact, there's more charges here, but I've kind of highlighted the ones that I'm most concerned about, just in terms of showing, could this be a trigger man potentially? Could this guy have been hired to take Crystal? With these types of charges that I'm seeing, especially this fourth-degree assault, first-degree strangulation, unlawful imprisonment charge, it's got me really, really concerned about that as well. But does this link at all back to Brooks? Not quite directly, but in a way there is a possible link between these two guys. Let's learn about it. A Kentucky State Police detective executed a warrant on 32-year-old Joseph Lawson in August of 2023, 2 months after a grand jury indicted him on those two charges. He called into his court arraignment from a hospital bed. We're going to find out that's for good reason also. Lawson is accused of destroying, mutilating, concealing, or removing physical evidence and aiding in the commission or planning of a crime that intentionally caused the death of another person. Based on these charges, I don't think we're talking about him actually being a trigger man in this situation, but being an accomplice having to do with covering this up in some way. That seems very, very clear. And coordinating with someone else to pull off this crime. How's he involved? Well, his name may sound unfamiliar, but it's not the first time that the name Lawson has come up in this investigation. Steve Lawson was mentioned on one of the very first police interviews between Nelson County Detective John Snow and the main suspect, Brooks Houck. The interrogation took place inside the Nelson County Sheriff's Department. The detective had asked who was on the other side of the phone line during a late-night phone call on the night that Rogers disappeared. "Who's Steve Lawson?" asked Snow. Houck responded, "Steve Lawson works for me." Houck told the detective that he couldn't remember why Steve Lawson had called him so late. If I recall correctly, it's also I think it's a 13-second conversation. I think it's a really, really short conversation. Then he picked up his phone and he called him from inside the interrogation room. So he basically takes his phone out, dials it up, and talks to Steve. Now, I'm going to have a link in the description box down below to 2 hours of this interrogation. I think it actually includes this moment in it. I have seen this moment in another video if it's not in that one. The phone call that he has with Steve Lawson is kind of bizarre. he acts like he's just chit-chatting with him at the start of it, and they're kind of just talking about work stuff and business and, oh, I'm going to need that steer skid and blah, blah, blah. It's got a bizarre tone considering this guy's being interviewed. His girlfriend, mother of his child, has gone missing. It's got a very bizarre tone to it. Please watch it for yourselves. Like I said, there's a link in the description box down below. But continuing with some of the transcript on it, Houck said, "That other night that you called me really, really late, I can't remember what you were calling me about." And Steve told Houck that he called him with a question about rental properties, which Houck replied that he had to ask Crystal and he would call to ask her and then would call him back. Detective Snow had to think about that answer and followed up with another question regarding an earlier statement that Houck had made. So that begs the question in my mind, if she's in the truck next to you when she called, why would you need to call her? I believe he means if she's in the truck next to you when he called, why would you need to call her? Anyway, WHAS 11 has since learned that Steve Lawson does have a son named Joseph, but they can't confirm that this is actually Joseph that has been arrested. So a little bit of potential connection there. And honestly, if it is a family, if Joseph is the son of Steve, that doesn't necessarily mean that that phone call from Steve had anything really to do with this case. It could. Who knows? It's basically all that video confirms is Steve is saying that he's the one that placed that phone call and they were talking about business stuff. Could he be lying to cover for his son? Certainly possible. Could he be telling the truth and that's all that that phone call was? Certainly possible as well. Would that omit his son from being part of this? Not necessarily. And we're showing if there's some connectivity potentially to this Lawson family where we have an arrest from Brooks. But once again, it's just, I keep looking for the solid line connection that we can make from Brooks to her disappearance, and we're still not there yet. But based on the movement that we're seeing, FBI with their comment about where the status of this case, I mean, they were almost talking about it at the anniversary like this thing is solved. Maybe they were coming off the high of actually representing this to the grand jury and hearing, oh, okay, we're finally going to get an arrest out of this. But they're speaking very strongly about this. Special prosecutor attached to this, and now an arrest. I think it's just a matter of us hearing the details as they get released publicly. Now, in an interesting turn, but I don't think one that is completely unexplainable, earlier I made a comment about there being a good reason for him calling into court from a bed. Nelson County man arrested in connection to Crystal Rogers' case, paralyzed, bound to a wheelchair. Lawson is being held in the Grayson County Detention Center in a cell for handicapped inmates. The jailer said Lawson is bound to a wheelchair and he's being held alone. A social media post Lawson made in September of 2021 mentions he was hospitalized and paralyzed from the waist down, but he didn't say what happened. So it sounds like we can kind of infer based on the way that that's phrased that in September 2021, something happened to him, and that's what has caused his paralysis. For the time that all this happened with Crystal, he was not paralyzed. The conspiracy charges against Lawson in the Rogers case imply investigators don't think Lawson acted alone, but nobody else has been publicly charged. The only person ever named as a suspect before now is Brooks, Rogers' boyfriend at the time of her death, who was never charged. And it's interesting, even this article is calling it her death. It's still her presumed death as far as we know. While the wheels of justice may take very different paths, Crystal's case is starting to seem familiar. We've previously reported on the murder of Jared Bridegan, a man who was also ambushed on his way home and killed in front of his toddler daughter, and that was after he had dropped off his other children with his ex-wife. Now, many theorized that it was a murder for hire and that his ex-wife, Shanna Gardner Fernandez, was likely a part of it. In that case, we saw a string of arrests that basically started from the bottom of the conspiracy and rolled up. First, a man named Henry Tenon was announced as being charged in January of 2023 in relation to that case. He wound up confessing to second-degree murder, being the trigger man for the conspiracy. He was a renter, and I believe he also occasionally did side work for Shanna's new husband, Mario Fernandez Saldana. Well, Mario would be arrested on March 16th, 2023. Now, in this time, Shanna had moved to Washington State for some unknown reason, essentially putting her as physically far away from Florida as you can get while staying in the same country. But on August 17th of 2023, it seems that that entire conspiracy chain was finally complete. Shanna Gardner Fernandez also arrested. She is facing first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation to commit a capital felony, and child abuse charges. Prosecutors are calling her the mastermind of the crime. Both her and her new husband are also facing the death penalty. Now, Shanna is fighting extradition back to Florida. We've seen this happen in cases before. I've never seen any of these fights really hold up, at least in the cases that we've covered here, but it's something that she's attempting. We've got an update here over at WOKV.com. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has now signed an extradition warrant for Shanna Gardner. The state attorney's office said the warrant is headed to Benton County, Washington, where she's currently being held. Actually, the day that I'm filming this video was supposed to be a hearing on all this. And basically, they've continued it to October 5th. That's going to allow the state to get time to receive the warrant and review it. I think this is just putting off the inevitable. I'm pretty sure she's going to get extradited back to Florida, but as of right now, that hasn't happened. Are we going to see a similar chain of arrests in the Crystal Rogers case? And if so, how long is that conspiracy chain going to wind up being? Thankfully, we have another arrest to talk about in the case of Ernie Ortiz, a case that we featured on Brainscratch about 1 year ago. In Garden City, Kansas, on September 12th, 2019, Ernie Ortiz was closing his restaurant, El Conquistador, when he was shot to death. It appeared to be a situation of a robbery gone wrong. A person was arrested and charged with the murder. However, in December of 2020, the charge was dropped and the person was released. The Kansas Department of Corrections then issued a set of cold case playing cards. They ordered 10,000 decks, and they gave them to victims' families, law enforcement organizations, and state prisons, as well as the county jails across the state. These decks feature many case profiles and pictures of unsolved homicide victims. In that set was Ernie Ortiz on the 5 of Hearts. And KCTV5 News is reporting that a tip came in due to that playing card. That tip led to an arrest warrant. The Garden City Police Department announced Samantha Jo Smith, 32, faces multiple charges for her involvement in the shooting death of Ernie Ortiz. They worked with U.S. Marshals to track her down. She had apparently moved out of Kansas. But 3 months later, she was arrested in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The arrest warrant was for first-degree murder and aggravated robbery, so it appears that she may have been acting alone, or at least that's the current belief. I'll keep an eye on it and let you know if there are any other significant developments, but it looks like we're getting really close to justice for the Ortiz family. Since the Kansas Department of Corrections has issued the cold case playing cards, they've received 14 credible tips from them. They also decided, hey, we should do more of this. They've ordered 5,000 more decks to be distributed. They're also talking about another version of these cards. They're looking for 52 new cases to feature on a completely different deck series. So kind of bringing us back to the conversation about a special prosecutor. While it seemed like a positive step in the Crystal Rogers case, and honestly, I really can't think of many situations where it wouldn't be a positive step, for some reason, in the Amber Spradlin case, it's become a powder keg. And reportedly, the family does not want it to happen, despite the fact that we have no arrests, and at least from the public's perspective, there's been really no movement on this case. Now, we covered Amber's case just last month. A tragic story of a woman that was out with co-workers and wound up with several people back at her boss's home. 911 calls that didn't dispatch any responders would be under high scrutiny when hours later it was reported that Amber was dead at the residence, reportedly with signs of being attacked. The scrutiny would increase as information about her boss came out, the local community dentist and owner of several businesses in town. People analyzed the events, including a phone call that had been made to the police chief that night, a chief who would later resign his post. Several questions loom over this community. Is someone getting away with murder because they have money and are in a position of power? Is a murderer that has been allowed freedom for 3 months now working to further hinder the investigation? Did the recently moved 911 dispatch system play a role in Amber's death? Honestly, today's updates might not really clear up those questions, and for some, it's probably just going to add to the assumptions. Let's just take a look at the sources, and a big thank you to X-Ray on Twitter for keeping me posted on the latest with Amber's case. Is a big fight between a county judge executive and a Commonwealth attorney really going to help to move Amber's case forward? Let's learn more about it, starting over at wymt.com. The Floyd County Fiscal Court is requesting special prosecution in regard to the Amber Spradlin murder investigation. Judge Executive Robbie Williams sent a letter to the Office of Attorney General Daniel Cameron requesting the appointment of a special prosecutor. In the letter, Williams stated his concerns surrounding the death of Spradlin. Quote, "The facts surrounding her death are unresolved, and no arrests have been made. It's my belief, and one shared by many in our small community, that this case needs the involvement of an outside special prosecutor." Williams said this belief is based on information he's been provided about the case, claiming that the Prestonburg Emergency 911 Center received a call from a local dentist, Dr. Michael McKinney, around 10 a.m. on June 18th, to report a young female was lying dead in his Floyd County home. Though no investigators have officially released the names of anyone involved, Williams goes on to say that McKinney identified the woman as Amber Spradlin and stated he believed she has been murdered. He said that reports have suggested there were 5 people in the home that night, including McKinney's college-aged son. He described a bloody crime scene and obvious wounds to Miss Spradlin's body, Williams wrote. The medical examiner's report identified multiple stab wounds on Miss Spradlin's body, one of which severed her spinal cord. It was a violent assault. When I first started reading this letter, I don't know how anyone could disagree with this thought of, hey, let's pull in extra resources, outside resources in terms of a special prosecutor to help with a case of this nature. The question of this case being tangled up kind of by local politics in terms of who this dentist / business owner, big pillar of the community, is connected to, that question has been there since day one with this case. And another big question in terms of how often do we see cases. Look, this guy actually heard the 911 calls. He's describing to us the information from the 911 calls in a way that's making me think, how could we not have an arrest in this case yet? This guy's saying, hey, there's a dead person in my house. It looks like she's been murdered. There are 5 people that are here. How are we 3 months down the line without an arrest in this case? It still just boggles my mind. But let's continue with more information. A little bit more from his letter asking for this help. Dr. McKinney is a prominent figure in Floyd County with significant long-standing ties to several elected county officials. Of particular concern is the statement and actions of these elected officials during the investigation. The circumstances surrounding Ms. Spradlin's death and the relationships of individuals present at Dr. McKinley's residence, McKinney, I think is what he meant, have become the focus of intense public debate and speculation. There's no doubt about that. Many Floyd County citizens are expressing skepticism over social media and in coffee shops about whether Amber and her family will receive justice. Some fear that there are too many personal conflicts among those responsible for seeking justice and those possibly involved with her murder. Ms. Spradlin's family members are questioning these close personal relationships and wondering if they may cloud the independence and judgment needed for this case. Whether these concerns are valid will likely never be known, but this situation is not typical, and the public needs reassurance. I don't know if you have been tracking true crime for a while, if you've looked into case after case after case, that statement is probably the strongest in this whole letter for me. This situation is not typical, and the public needs reassurance. I don't know how you could disagree with that statement. It's not typical. It's not typical to hear that there was a murder in a house. You've got 5 potential suspects that are part of that, and you're 3 months down the line and there has been no charge. Now, maybe there wouldn't be murder charges filed, but at least obstruction of justice charges or some type of lower level charges that at least get some of those people into a position where they're being interrogated or at least in police custody. That would be expected in a case of this nature, unless there's some bizarre circumstances that just haven't been publicly released. I don't understand how we're not at that step with this case. I understand not murder charges yet. I understand DNA takes time to process. I've seen previously it used almost as a mechanism. Get that person in custody with these weaker charges, finish up work in terms of investigation or additional testing. All of a sudden, those weaker charges will sometimes stay and then just have more serious charges stacked on top of them. Sometimes the weaker ones drop out as the newer charges are laid on them. I don't understand what we're seeing here. And that is the problem with this case from the public's perspective. Unless, like I said, there's got to be some very strange circumstance happening here that we're not aware of that is, for some reason the family thinks is understandable in terms of investigations of this nature. But it also makes you wonder, what's their experience? I would like to hope this family has never been through anything like this before. Why is there some level of expectation that, it's okay for there to not be an arrest at this point? I don't know. Back to another part of his letter. I firmly believe the Spradlin family and public must have complete confidence in our criminal justice system, and the best way to achieve this now is through the timely appointment of a special prosecutor. When I was first sent this letter and read through it, I was like, thankfully, we're getting to that next step. We're seeing it in the Crystal Rogers case. Seems like it's a great step. Family's excited about it. Is that what we have here? Let's continue, but first let's learn a little bit more about what a county judge executive is. At first, when I hear that, I was like, oh, we've got a judge here. Not quite exactly the way you would think about it. A county judge executive is an elected official in the U.S. Commonwealth of Kentucky who's the head of the executive branch of a government in a county. In other states, similar positions are often titled county executive or county mayor. He wields no judicial power. The judge executive is the presiding officer and a voting member of the fiscal court, enabling him to exercise a role in the legislative process. In Kentucky's consolidated city-county governments, premier executive power is exercised by either the metro mayor or the urban county mayor. So it's, is it a position of some authority? Sure. As an elected official, is there some things to be concerned about there with him stepping into this conversation, this big case that is gaining national exposure? Could he be trying to leverage this in some way for a re-election or something like that? I think you have to think about that. But could he also just be trying to help? Possibly. And some information I've found makes it look like he is actually writing on the back of another letter that was sent from the family asking for some type of special oversight with this case. It's not that his letter all of a sudden comes out of left field. Now, the family has some issues even with that aspect, wondering how he saw a copy of that letter, which, again, in my mind, is pointing back to we're dealing with some interesting power structures here. Even to think of this type of role, this county judge executive, how is he having access to criminal or records that are part of a criminal investigation? How did he get to even hear the 911 calls? Which, by the way, we're going to hear a little bit more about in this. And based on what we're hearing, even from the family about what those calls are, I don't know why they didn't release the first call right off the bat. It's really not even related to Amber. So all these things are just making me think that the power structures, the way that things work in this area, they seem to be somewhat maybe not out of control, but not in a place where you can easily anticipate them. And that's just leading me even stronger towards yes, bring in a special prosecutor, bring in someone from outside of this tangled web. That's really what this this power structure feels like. Continuing over at Mountaintop Media, Floyd County Commonwealth's attorney, Brent Turner, that was the second picture we looked at the start of this segment, he's weighed in, and his reaction is highly negative. I think that might be an understatement. As you know, the county judge executive's office has absolutely nothing to do with any criminal investigation being conducted by the Kentucky State Police and my office, Turner wrote. You have zero knowledge about the investigation or the tremendous amount of work that's been done. He also says that both he and the family are opposed to any attempt to appoint a special prosecutor. So now, the first guy was saying he was speaking on the family's behalf. We got this guy saying, no, I'm speaking on the family's behalf. The family contacted me today and advised me that you did not consult at all about your request for a special prosecutor. Further, they have stated that they are completely opposed to any such request and will be asking the Attorney General's office to deny your attempt to change prosecutors in the case. In fact, your request has caused additional stress, worry, and grief to the family of Amber Spradlin because it is their desire that my office continue handling the case. As you're fully aware, the family of Amber Spradlin has obtained legal counsel and intends to sue you personally over your decision to move the 911 call center away from the Kentucky State Police. We are back. This letter at this point, for me, has just pivoted back to that. I don't want to say it's nonsense. It's a very, very serious issue that's going on with this 911 call center, but it's a political soapbox. And these guys love getting on this over and over and over. And quite honestly, we're going to hear about that first 911 call. Based on what we're hearing about that call, this whole conversation about the failure of 911 in terms of Amber's death doesn't seem to be valid. So even this statement being made here that, this family's going to sue you directly, I don't know how that holds up when we hear about the first 911 call and with the bit that we've heard about the second 911 call. But anyway, back to his letter. In fact, they have stated many times publicly and privately to you that they blame you for Amber's death. You have even authorized the expenditure of tens of thousands of taxpayer dollars to defend yourself from the anticipated civil suit. The only thing we can conclude is that you made this unilateral request against the family's wishes in a pathetic attempt to gain some political advantage or to rehabilitate your tarnished image over the 911 fiasco that many in the public, including Amber's family, have blamed you for. A lot of statements made on Amber's family's behalf. And if that original letter that was sent from Robbie Williams had no basis, if it just literally came, honestly, even if it did come from that, I don't know that we can necessarily write it off as some type of political maneuvering on his part. Maybe he's thinking about re-election. I don't know. Maybe he's trying to make things up to the family by doing something that he thinks will actually help this case. I don't know. But to say I'm not impressed by the response from this attorney is probably an understatement. I don't know what the benefit of this type of response is. If the family's going to sue him, sue him. Why are we doing this tongue lashing in the middle of all this? I don't know. How is that helping Amber's case? I don't know. And I get that the family might be worried that that previous letter might be harming in some way. What if all of a sudden a special prosecutor comes in who doesn't know anything about the case at that point? Well, then what does happen? Does that stop the way that the investigation is being processed? Not really. Would it stop the prosecution from happening? Probably not. So, this 911 call. Over at lex18.com, we have information from Spradlin's cousin, Dr. Debbie Hall, who's been kind of the main family person in terms of media contact on this case. She's saying she was able to listen to that initial 911 call. The phone call was not about Amber, and it was not made by Amber, she said. But it was still information in the phone call that I feel like, had it been anywhere else, there would have been a response. Someone would have at least made a welfare check. Hall said that the call was about a man in the home who was drunk and was bleeding profusely, perhaps from a fall. She said that in the call, someone could be heard taking the phone and saying that they had the situation under control. Even if the call wasn't about Amber, Hall says she believes if officials had responded to check it out, that it could have made a difference. And that's certainly worth considering. But knowing that that initial phone call didn't mention Amber at all, that there was no context of what happened to Amber being really in that phone call outside of, we don't know, this man that's bleeding profusely, was there someone else there that was attacking a bunch of people? Like it could be a part of the investigation, and maybe that is why that call has not been released yet. But even this level of detail on what that call is, in my mind, this should have been out months ago, because this community has been spinning on these phone calls. And the lack of having this information in the public has allowed that soapboxing element to overshadow so much of Amber's case. It really is, in a really, really bad way. And I can't believe that these guys are getting on those soapboxes over and over and over, knowing that. Like, how can you not realize that? I'm on the Justice for Amber page quite often, and every time I read someone's post that this is being covered up or being swept under the rug, or that KSP isn't doing their job, it really is upsetting to me, because I do feel like the KSP is doing a very good job, Hall said. So she is under the assumption they're doing a good job. And with that, I have to assume there is some bizarre circumstance. But even with, I can't imagine what it is, guys. If you have thoughts on what that could be, that's slowing down this process in this way, please tell me about it in the comments down below. I can't imagine when you've got that small of a group of people that you don't have an arrest yet. Back to a quote from her: "This is just horrible, and I think that most people really want to see someone answer for what they've done." Yes, absolutely. And the interesting thing there is that most people want that for the family, for Debbie Hall to be able to have some relief in terms of what's going on around this. It's a real tricky thing in terms of talking about this case and having the family represented like that by an attorney who's saying, hey, the family wants us to do this, we're going to do that. Like, is that really how these types of things work in general? In general, I can tell you, no, it's not. So is that an accurate statement? Like, are the prosecutors really following the family's lead? No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. Is there some other benefit to the prosecutor? I don't know. Rolling back a little bit in terms of how the order that these letters were sent, there was actually a letter that was sent even before Robbie Williams's letter. And that was a letter that was sent from the family. And basically, this letter might be the catalyst for Robbie Williams's letter. Mountaintop Media reports on at least one family member acknowledging the need for a different type of oversight. A statement from Spradlin's cousin, Dr. Deborah Hall, over the weekend indicated that the family stands firmly behind Brent Turner and the Kentucky State Police. But in a letter written by Hall to Cameron's office on August 22nd, so that predates these other two letters since, she acknowledges the need for some type of oversight over the situation. I would like to request that, if any way possible, some oversight is provided to the investigation of the case, she wrote. I have faith in the work the KSP is conducting, but am concerned about all the closeness and social ties Dr. McKinney has with local and statewide politicians, and I'm concerned Amber will not get justice for this horrendous case. My concern is that Dr. McKinney is a wealthy, influential person with lots of political ties, and this could affect the progress of the case. Why in the world would he be calling city and county officials shortly after finding a murdered woman in his house? He is very good friends with the chief of police, attends ball games and other social events with him. Additionally, the chief of police is cousins with two other individuals who were present in the home during the murder. The chief of police resigned 6 days following the murder. Dr. McKinney is a financial contributor to the Democratic Party, and since our governor oversees the KSP, I'm concerned about the integrity of the investigation. From what I know thus far, it seems a cover-up was attempted, but thwarted by the arrival of KSP on the scene. Oh, So knowing that that letter went first, and it does seem that somehow Robbie Williams saw that letter, that gives me different context for his letter. It's almost like he saw the letter that the family had written and said, I know about this thing that they're trying to ask for. Because the family doesn't seem to know what they're really asking for. Just like, hey, we need some type of oversight, whatever you guys can do. I believe that he saw that letter and thought he was helping with his response by clarifying the request and saying, hey, I'm concerned about the same stuff. We need a special prosecutor. And at that point, the family says, no, that's not what we're asking for. Regardless, what happens? The Attorney General's office denies the request. Attorney General Daniel Cameron has rejected a request by Floyd County Judge Executive Robbie Williams to appoint a special prosecutor. So there's another letter. On September 11th, we received email correspondence from Spradlin's cousin, Dr. Deborah Hall, expressing the family's confidence in the handling of the case by the Commonwealth's attorney for the 31st Judicial Circuit, the letter notes. The letter goes on to say that Williams has no authority to make such a request. Seems like that's true, and that's pretty much what Turner said as well. A county judge executive is not one of the officials specified in the statute as someone with authority to request the appointment of a special prosecutor in a matter. The circumstances do not at present appear to call for a special prosecutor appointment. Therefore, the office respectfully declines your request. Turner reacted positively to Cameron's decision and used the occasion to again lambaste Williams. I'm not impressed in this method of communication. Even if you believe Robbie Williams did this because he's just trying to win his next election, even if you believe the absolute worst, how is this type of communication helping the situation, pulling focus back to Amber, helping to progress things and move them forward? Quote from Turner: there was never any question that this request would be denied because Robbie Williams has no more authority to request a special prosecutor than the dog catcher does. He said that to Mountaintop News. He also said, if we need a load of gravel or if the toilet gets stopped up at the Senior Citizen Center, we'll call him. But when it comes to murder cases, he needs to leave that to the team of professional investigators and prosecutors to deal with. I don't know that that's the voice I would want seeking justice for my murdered loved one, personally. Floyd County murder investigation sparks contention and confusion. Not just sparks it, it's been burning, and it's been burning for months. Hall remains adamant that the family does not want special prosecution. She said the original letter she penned, which Williams claims was his inspiration, so there's a confirmation. Williams is saying, I saw that other letter first, that's why I wrote mine. They're saying that it was intended as a request for oversight, not special prosecution, and she felt set up to see it used by Williams. It was never meant for his eyes, and I never requested his assistance in this matter, she said. Hall said that she sent the aforementioned email to the AG's office Monday to clear up the misconceptions. That's the one that we heard from them. She's saying, I did write a letter to AG Cameron, but that was to voice my concern about possible corruption on the opposing side. Our family has the utmost confidence and faith in Brent Turner and respectfully request he be allowed to remain prosecuting attorney for our case. If my intentions were misconstrued, please forgive me and disregard the letter. It seems to me that we're also seeing Amber's family is struggling with trying to find the right approach on all this. And on top of that, they're still just at the beginning of processing their grief about her loss. They aren't going to be in a great position for making the most rational or logical decisions right now, which honestly is why families don't lead criminal investigations. Families don't tell prosecutors what to do with their criminal investigations. If someone defers to the family's wishes, or maybe more accurately uses it as a justification for their position or actions like we're seeing here, in my opinion, it's only because it's already in line with what that person's going for, or it benefits that person in some way. And that's got me thinking, how many cases with this level of national exposure do you think come across the desk of a prosecutor in Floyd County, Kentucky? Those responses from Turner, they sure sound like grandstanding to me. He knew the special prosecutor request would fail, according to him, and It appears he was correct. So why take the time to write up that response at all? Why take those cheap shots? Couldn't the time and energy taken in writing that response have been used to actually help progress Amber's case in some way? Is it really that well covered? Everything else is locked down? He could take time to write up letters like that? And if this is a powerful cover-up, which Amber's family is clearly concerned about at some level, I'd be really cautious about who I was trusting. And honestly, I'd welcome the help of an outside special prosecutor. It doesn't change the footwork done by the investigators. It doesn't stop the evidence from being processed. There is no risk of some type of court deadline being missed when you don't even have an arrest. Let's be honest here. This isn't a case of a national manhunt. They know the players, and it's been 3 months. 3 months that someone could be obstructing their investigative efforts even further or making plans to leave the country. This case has seemingly moved from the hotbed of a political argument over a 911 call center to a new twist on localized popularity and public insults, while everyone watching is still waiting for something very, very simple. Just a small sign of progress. For Crystal Rogers, the special prosecutor is that sign. But in Amber's case, it was just another reason to yell at each other. It just seems like this case is constantly being exploited for momentary social victories, all while a murderer walks around freely. I don't agree with Barbara Corcoran's quote from the start of this episode. I don't think the wheels of justice are square. But in Amber's case, I'm worried that they could be extremely wobbly. And for the amount that they're actually turning, they sure are making a lot of noise. Since 2015, we have always run limited commercial ads for the benefit of the viewers and the families that we're trying to help. Obviously, we can't do that without support. A big thank you to PayPal supporters Hillary Green and Brandy Fry. If you'd like to help, please visit LordanArts.com. There you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even just buy us a coffee like Casey Schaefer recently did. We really appreciate your support on our mission to run as few ads as possible while we help as many cases as we can. Have a nice weekend, and please join us here again soon on the LordanArts channel.